I always really like the first row of events because they're always completely empty. Kudos to you for sitting in the front. But you know, there's these nice couches here and everything. A pillow over here, it says every day is an adventure. You could have an adventure if you sit in the front row. So today I'm going to talk about inclusive architecture and this idea of how to build sustainable development teams. When people hear about this thing called the PAM stack, I like to tell people it's the new Agile, but I'm also half kidding because it's not. But what PAM stack stands for is process, abstractions, and mentorship. So we're going to explore these three ideas today in how to build inclusive architectures. So why inclusive architecture? When we talk about this, we talk about building a good foundation for your team to actually enable your team to do better and be better. So we're going to talk a lot about inclusive architectures and how they actually enable junior developers. But what I want you all to think about is focus on what these ideas do for your team as a whole. So what we're going to be talking about, less project maintenance, meaning a code base that's not reliant on just a handful of senior developers. Less stress, so process, adding in process that actually enables things like conflict resolution and more team buy-in. Cooperative teams, meaning having good code conventions in place and standards to help with, again, more cooperation. Lowering the cost over time on developers, right? If you have a more approachable code base, guess what? You get to hire people and you don't have to spend top dollar on headcount. More inclusion as well. If you have a good foundation set in place, then you have more of the ability to hire juniors, which provides you with a much wider, diverse set of candidates. So as Peter said, my name is Tracy. I am the lead at a company called This.Labs. We do a lot of stuff for the community. You might have seen us online. But primarily we also do JavaScript consulting, so anything related to Angular, React, Node, Vue, Polymer, et cetera, we have fun. So if you need help, let us know. I'm also on the RxJS core team. I'm a GDE for Angular and the web. Microsoft MVP, I do community relations for Node at the OpenJS Foundation, and I do a lot of stuff related to just helping women in tech and changing the ratio. So juniors. Let's talk about why juniors sometimes are not successful on teams. A lot of the times, it's not actually the fault of the juniors and their lack of knowledge, which is what a lot of people kind of say, but so I think the people perception of why juniors don't succeed is actually wrong. It's typically the fault of the teams. So not making inclusive decisions in your code base, again. Decisions about how to structure the team. What are the roles that play to make people successful? These might actually be the reasons for early failures of juniors when they're starting up. But the decisions that make juniors actually fail on your team actually make everybody else unsuccessful on your team as well. So here's some great examples of why juniors tend to fail on your team. So poor onboarding documentation. This means that they always have to ask about everything. There's nothing they can reference on their own. I'm sure a lot of you have either dealt with this personally as a junior developer or are dealing with this in your teams. Individual excellence. So seniors have to micromanage juniors to make sure they don't make mistakes, right? That kind of sucks. Also, an unnecessarily complex code base. So we all love code, but overcomplicating development and design problems when they don't need to be complex, making sure you're thinking about abstractions that can actually help juniors and the rest of your team be more successful. And then also when everyone assumes like, oh yeah, we're the best, we're a great, amazing team, right? That means that you kind of make the assumption that everyone's on their own and should do learning themselves, and individuals actually become quite stagnant. And this is how it hurts everybody. If you don't have the good onboarding documentation, that means that every single person that joins your team, the knowledge becomes inconsistent, right? In order to jump in and get productive on the code base, you need to be actually on the senior level because you just need to know how to swim. Individual excellence, that means that you have certain people that probably are siloing their experience, and then you have these hit by a bus fear. So if that person leaves, what are you going to do, right? If you lose them, it could take months or years to reverse engineer something. Also, complex code bases make everybody unproductive. If your code base actually deviates from industry standards because you were really excited or somebody on your team was really excited and wanted to do it their way, it's much more difficult to get everyone productive immediately. On the other hand, if you start relying on best practices and standards, then somebody can be productive from day one. Also, lack of advancement. I have a lot of seniors on my team, for example, and I look at them and I'm like, man, I want to help them grow. I want to help them grow. You need to make sure you are creating mentorship opportunities for everybody on your team, mid-level, senior level, instead of promoting people from within. Let's see, hold on. I feel like, give me 1 second. How do I get over there? Text messages from my husband. It's like, why did you tweet about me and my grass? Is it option? Okay, there it is. Thank you. Did I do it?
You got it.
Okay, thank you. Hard to see over there. Don't tell him I'm talking about his grass. Otherwise, we're going to have a long conversation tonight. Okay. Good thing he doesn't check my Twitter all the time. Okay. So what could your project actually be with an inclusive vision? Well, if you have an inclusive vision and an inclusive architecture, that means all of a sudden individuals actually succeed through team collaboration, there's processes in place, there's mentorship, there's a great supportive culture, you decrease unnecessary complexity, right? And you actually can focus on building important features and simplifying your life using abstractions and tools and frameworks. And then all of a sudden there's more innovation, more excitement on your teams, and there's more teaching across skill levels because nobody's all stressed out anymore. And you get a wider and more diverse set of engineers, which means all of a sudden you can bring the, juniors and mids, and all of a sudden your environment and your culture changes, which is awesome. That's all what we want. So let's get back to the PAM stack really quickly. And these ideas, again, are supposed to help you build an inclusive team. So the first thing is process. And, it's the PAM stack, so I have to talk about process first. But a lot of people hear process and they're like, oh God, meetings, paperwork, buzzwords. There's got to be a better way. But, that's not what process is. So I'll read through a description of an organization without process. And you can tell me if it sounds like your team or a team that you've had before. So in this organization, processes are usually ad hoc and chaotic. The organization usually does not provide a stable environment to support processes. Success in these organizations depends on the competence and heroics of the people in the organization and not on the use of proven processes. They're characterized by their tendency to overcommit, abandon their process in the time of crisis, and unable to actually repeat their successes. So this means that only rockstar developers can really succeed in this type of environment. You're constantly overcommitted and rushing things. Why did a project fail or succeed? It's completely arbitrary. Projects will go over schedule or blow through budget, and also nobody knows what's supposed to do what, right? There's confusion over roles and responsibilities, micromanagement, tons of bike shedding. So this quote I read over here of a team with no process is actually from the CMMI model for development. It's a really large PDF if you ever want to read through it. But there's tons of these sort of model process frameworks out there that you can check out. So if we actually took all that and said, hey, what if we actually take process seriously and deliberately, that means all of a sudden you have clear expectations. Team engagement and cooperation actually happens. There's no single points of failure, which is awesome. You're less stressed during launch times. You're reducing the amount of conflicts and power struggles and all that drama. And let's talk about just some super easy things that you can do to start integrating process. So first things first is just start creating plans, right? Like when you're going to be doing something, start thinking about, okay, I'm going to do something, or my team is going to do something, what needs to be done, who's going to do it, how should it be done, when should it be done, and then write those things down and actually start following them. A great example is a code review, right? Like every single team has different ways of how they do code reviews, but in general, we typically follow, pretty simple things. So this process over here, what we've done is we've, written it down. We've also even said, okay, hey, what happens when there's actually disagreements or conflict within the team? There's a predetermined way to actually deal with that instead of, again, relying on office politics to get something done. Also, I think a lot of people underestimate the idea of actually just adding roles and responsibilities. So this is a really integral part of making a team functional. So here what we do is we just list out in the code review process who's going to participate, what are the responsibilities of everybody, and that way everybody knows what role they're supposed to play within the process. Another really easy thing to do is just start creating checklists. So, you know, you think about it, right? I mean, how many things do you need to do? So, you know, this really helps minimize errors that you might have, or, you know, again, team members, right? Like instead of saying, oh my gosh, I don't have time, we're super busy doing a release, a new person is onboarded. Imagine if you just had a bunch of checklists available to just give them. So one thing that I used to do is we were onboarding so many people. We were onboarding like 20 people a week. And, you know, I used to train everybody, you know, for an hour each time. And then all of a sudden my schedule just turned into hell. So what I would do is every time I taught somebody something, I would actually record it on QuickTime. And then now in our company, we actually have a how-tos. And so anytime somebody wants to learn something, I just say, okay, watch the video first and let me know if you have any questions. That way I'm not repeating myself a million times, right? And that way also the message is consistent with every single person that joins the team. So highly recommend just creating checklists or doing things like that. Simple things, not stressful. Another thing you want to do is actually make sure you're reviewing things. So we're all familiar with code reviews, obviously, but you know, make sure you're reviewing what your team is doing. Meeting notes, reviewing designs, reviewing requirements, even emails to clients if you're doing consulting. Are you on the same page? Did you promise something? Did that get communicated across everybody? Reviewing plans as well. And these types of things will help your team work better in the long run, right? It'll help you guys actually improve how you do things so that you can do things better for the future. So my next favorite pillar is abstractions. And abstractions are basically things that help make building software more accessible. So I'm going to talk about a lot of tools and abstractions and approaches today, which hopefully help your teams achieve greater happiness, productivity, and inclusivity. I think the first thing we should acknowledge is that web development is actually hard, right? Like performance, security, accessibility, you know, PWAs, browser compatibilities, every single day, especially if you're on Twitter, right? Do you not feel like, okay, now I need to be an accessibility expert. All right, now I need to be a performance expert. Okay, progressive web apps. Like, when does the learning stop, right? And that can be really stressful, which is why we call it JavaScript fatigue, obviously. But hopefully, you know, frameworks and libraries can help. So, you know, a lot of senior developers, they're like, okay, maybe, you know, raw DOM manipulation is easier or faster or whatever, but you're leaving juniors behind, right? I'll give you a good example. So when I was first learning JavaScript, I was, you know, HTML, CSS, marquee tag, yes, blink tag, wasn't deprecated yet. And my teacher kept hesitating to give me a framework. And he saw me just like, I was building apps every single day. I was like, look, it's scrolling across the screen. And finally, he gave me Ember. He's like, okay, fine, here you go. And then, you know, Ember, because it's so easy to pick up and, you know, because it just did everything for me, I spent the entire weekend building websites. And so I love that. I love that frameworks, again, can just help anybody be successful from day one. I want to talk about Angular really quickly. And, you know, I mean, as I talk through Angular, you'll probably be like, oh, yeah, this is how Ember is, or React is, or Vue is, or whatever. But I'm going to use Angular in this example. So imagine being a junior in a very large team and having to actually start working on a company-wide project, right? What do you do? Where do you go? How do I get started? What am I even, like, what do I even do? Well, the thing I like about Angular and other opinionated frameworks is that it really imposes a very strict way to do things, and it makes it so much easier for junior developers to just get up to speed immediately. Actually, anybody, right? Like, you can be productive from day one. I also love the fact that, you know, TypeScript is basically, you have to use TypeScript. So this makes it easier to avoid bugs. The code is easier to read. There's a component-based architecture. You can create libraries and schematics. And beginners, can start working on smaller parts of projects that are very specific and defined, which is awesome. And you're just like not lost in a sea of services and dependencies and all that other drama. So, React, Vue, et cetera. I mean, I can't talk about all the technologies, but great things about the Angular community, right? You have the CLI, you have Angular console, which is basically a graphical user interface, external tools, prettier in everyone's community, documentation, NX, and even the architecture and code base really helps. So libraries like RX and NGRX, TypeScript, of course, and then Angular Material, which helps make beautiful sites. So the architecture, so the very architecture of Angular and the applications also really help. So junior developers can basically use abstractions within the framework to basically obscure what happens behind the scenes and, again, get productive immediately. TypeScript, again, I mean, I love TypeScript. Sometimes I wish, React and TypeScript, I feel like is there. I at least feel like I can do it. But certain other frameworks and libraries, they're starting to get there. So everybody make PRs to enable more TypeScript support with whatever community you're in. The great part about TypeScript, though, is when you're using it, you have so many different, strongly typed methods, variables, and services. It makes it easier to understand the functionality and the purpose of each part of the code. Stricter rules means less bugs as well, which is awesome. You have better error handling. It's easier to spot the root cause of problems. I love that TypeScript also gives you more descriptive errors in your console to figure out what's wrong. And when juniors are able to use this, it helps them because it makes them more careful when designing new things, right? And also teaches them best practices. So even if you know that you should be using a framework, right? Obviously, you need to figure out how to set something up. And this is why I love our community these days. I feel like a new CLI is coming out every single day. These are a few of them, of course, that I love. But the great thing about CLIs is that you can always find really good documentation, well, sometimes, most of the time, you can find good documentation about the CLI. Before CLIs, everybody had to set up their own tech stack, configure each project from scratch. But this stuff is super awesome, and CLIs, I think we kind of take them for granted. But it's amazing that you have smart defaults, zero config environments, out-of-the-box performance, lazy loading, documentation. The other thing I really love about most CLIs these days for the large frameworks is that they allow you to easily migrate between the major versions of the library, which is awesome. So if you're not using a CLI, definitely check it out. And I also love kind of like the next generation, the framework GUIs that are starting to come out. So if anybody hasn't used Vue UI, you should definitely check it out. Like this specifically I really love because I've never checked out, like you can actually understand your bundle size visually. And I mean, that's amazing that you just get that out of the box, right? Angular console as well is pretty awesome. So another great abstraction for building junior-friendly software is obviously using things like Redux or NGRX. These libraries allow us to split up our application into state, actions, and also effects and reducers, right? So the thing I love about this is that senior developers or architects can basically make sure that the domain is properly broken up into meaningful actions and well-designed effects. And then these Redux actions that you give are basically like Amazon buttons, right? Like you don't have to know what happens when you press that button. You just know you press that button and a new bottle of detergent arrives, and it's awesome. So things like this allow you to be more productive and developers to be more productive because you don't need to worry about breaking the logic of the page because you're just, boop, I'm done, good. I also really love state machines. And I feel like 2019 has been the rise of state machines. They're a really powerful way to isolate business logic and user flow away from the syntax and details of your implementation and framework. And the great thing about it is that somebody can design this, and then other engineers just need to map the state machine to their code, and then all of a sudden everything works correctly. So David Piano's library XState is pretty awesome. His name isn't David Piano, but he's David K. Piano on Twitter. So this is a state management library, and it allows you to really easily visualize state machines because it has a built-in GUI. So here's an example of a complex state machine tracking a purchase process from Ryan Florence. And this controls his entire purchasing flow, right? It's just laid out right here. But again, architects can basically provide this for their companies, and you know, boom, you're done, right? And what this does is it makes things a logic problem instead of a tech problem. And juniors can easily visualize, again, what they're supposed to do, and they're not responsible for the critical business logic thinking, which is awesome. Another common mistake we see a lot with teams is just not being deliberate enough about their visual design and component building, right? Teams, you know, I mean, we are all familiar with this, but like you're always building a new date picker or an autocomplete box or a button or a modal for every single project. And you know, the problem with that is that each implementation, you know, depending on the day, depending on when it was built, depends on, you know, again, when was it built, who was it built by, et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of sucks. So I also love the rise of design systems that we've been seeing lately. Design systems really help improve the quality of a project and really eliminate a lot of confusion about how to visually implement pages and applications. Great design systems out there, Shopify's Polaris, of course, Google's Material Design. I believe Airbnb has done a lot of writing as well about design systems, and also if you look at Netflix, they've talked a lot about their design systems as well. But this is awesome because all of a sudden, all your user interfaces are coherent and consistent, and you're also reducing the amount of CSS required to lay out every single page. Also, component libraries like you know, Material UI, Downshift, Reach UI, you know, these all provide basically themable building blocks, which is amazing. And the reason why I love these libraries, again, is because there's best practices already for accessibility and performance kind of already baked in, right? And again, with junior developers, you can just be productive immediately because these are basically like Lego blocks. You know, adopt the library, npm install, npx install, whatever, and then all of a sudden, magic happens. So we've talked about two pillars so far, process and abstractions, but now I want to talk about mentorship. And the reason why this pillar is actually the most important, even though calling it the map stack just didn't seem as, you know, nice for some reason. When I said Pam stack, were you guys like, the jam stack? But one reason why this pillar is so important is because this pillar enables you guys to have an actual culture shift from within your organization. I think that's very, very important. So when we're thinking about a proper culture of mentorship, right? Like imagine if you change the thinking on your teams of not like, I need to get promoted, I'm gonna get promoted to a new, you know, to a senior engineer or to an architect or whatever, but imagine if your boss told you, you cannot be promoted unless you can train somebody and nominate them into your position. All of a sudden, that really changes the mindset. It's not beneficial for you to selfishly like go off and be the rock star developer and be the best developer, right? But all of a sudden, you need to become a rock star mentor. Otherwise, you're totally screwed, right? So that type of thing, I mean, that's a little bit to the extreme, but if people start thinking that way, then I feel like things will start changing. So why mentorship? Okay, so obviously hiring is expensive. I mean, technical people have to conduct interviews. You have to onboard and train people. If you lose somebody, you know, hiring 6 to 8 weeks, 2 to 6 months to actually train that person to be productive, right? This turn creates a lot of like burnout and unhappiness for remaining workers. So, you know, maybe you should tell your bosses that if you don't have like formal mentorship in place. But the best plan for all teams is just to make sure that you have mentorship so that nobody wants to leave. That would be amazing. What's in it for the mentees? I mean, accelerated learning and growth, increasing confidence, which increases productivity. You know, a lot of junior developers are scared to contribute. Am I saying it right? Should I speak up? But was I, you know, whatever. And if you mentor them to say, no, actually that was a great decision, they will want to speak up. Shocking. Also increasing communication skills. So talking about your code is so helpful because if you can't talk through your code, I mean, talking through your code obviously makes you a better developer. Mentees obviously feel invested in and valued, and also there's upward mobility, right? Sun Microsystems did this study where they found that mentees are actually 5 times more likely to be promoted, and then mentees become mentors, and you kind of, create this cycle, right, of passing all the benefits along. Benefits for companies. So obviously great for recruiting because you have a great culture now. It also increases developer productivity and retention. So mentors and mentees are apparently about 70% more likely to stay compared to other employees when there's mentorship in place. This also reduces the knowledge silos. If you have to teach everybody everything, that means that that hit by a bus fear thing that happens is less likely because everybody kind of understands the system, right? You also create, again, more culture, increasing loyalty, and you can actually promote these people. So mentors are actually 6 times more likely to be promoted because I think mentoring actually makes you a better developer as well. So you might be saying like, yeah, fine, we agree, right? But how do I add this to my team? What does it actually look like? So great mentorship activities, some examples would be, the formal one-on-one sessions, where a junior and a senior or a mid and a senior, however you want to do it, goes into a room and talks about development topics. Code reviews as well, right? Like authors get to learn from the comments of their reviewers. Reviewers get to learn new patterns and important information about the system. Pair programming as well. So I pair with so many people and, don't touch the keyboard, seniors. Let us do it. But let the seniors dictate and the juniors drive, right? So that's really amazing and that's incredibly useful. Tech talks as well, just doing internal tech talks and saying like, hey, we're going to have lunch and I want to give a 5-minute lightning talk, teaching people, encouraging that type of culture. That's something everybody can do. Also chat channels, so just creating a Slack channel. Like one of our clients has a channel called UI Shit. And UI Party. So, what a great culture, right? But, they get to post, they get to talk about different things. And, we have the same thing at this talk. So we talked about a lot of things today, but they can basically be summarized into the PAM stack, process abstractions, and then mentorship. And after this talk, a lot of juniors actually come up and ask me, what do I do? How can I do this? How can I help? But you can bootstrap the process, right? You don't have to be a senior developer or a manager to actually start implementing these things. For example, process. You see things, somebody's teaching you something, just write it down. Have a document, share it with the team. Mentor and help your peers that are being onboarded. Ask questions. What's the process? What's the code? What's the project? Document all these things that you learn and then share them with others, right? Ask for code reviews and just do code reviews. You don't have to be the most senior person, like your senior architect or whatever. Like he or she could probably use a code review as well. And that's a really great way for you to start understanding or getting feedback, and again, creating that culture of mentorship, asking things. And if your team really likes these ideas, then you can start asking it to be like formally incorporated into a process, and then again, from the ground up. So as I said before, this dot, we do a lot of things on the intranet. We have an apprentice program to help get women in tech. So if you're looking for a woman in tech and you want to hire them, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to connect you with different people. We have a formal apprenticeship program as well. We also do a lot of online events. We're trying to make the web more accessible, right? So this is great if you just want to give a 5-minute talk about something. Feel free, or if anybody knows, I mean, it's not a scary place. And we're really using these online events as a way for people to, take the first step into public speaking. So I love it because, we get a lot of outreach from folks in Africa, and, they can't come to a meetup in, the Bay Area or wherever. And this allows them to do so. So every first Thursday, second Thursday, third Thursday, we do different ones. Also, Katarina, who's on our team, she's doing a Cloud Functions and Firebase training on October 8th. So if you're curious about that, let me know. We also provide diversity scholarships for women in tech. So if somebody on your team is excited, then you can feel free to message me as well. Also, again, we do consulting, so always happy to help. I'm always in the Midwest going like up and down. And we're hiring. We're always hiring. So if you get excited about this type of stuff and are excited about like working on these types of things, let me know. Thanks for letting me chat.